I'm Hazel. I'm sitting in my new condo, looking out at the garden where I've planted some deep red rose bushes. It's a far cry from the life I thought I'd have, but I've found a new kind of peace here. A few months ago, I was in a courtroom, facing the man who was once my husband, Victor, and his new partner, Stella. The tension in the air was palpable as the judge, Judge Miller, prepared to deliver the verdict. I remember sitting there, my hands folded in my lap, trying to stay calm. It all started years ago. Victor and I had built a life together. I was a high school math teacher for 35 years, and Victor ran a small software company. We raised our 2 children, a son named Ethan and a daughter named Ava. Our home on Elm Street was filled with laughter, family dinners, and memories. But then, things began to change. A few years ago, Victor started going to the gym. At first, I thought it was a good thing. A 72-year-old man taking care of his health, I encouraged him. But it soon became clear that something was off. He bought new workout gear, started coming home later on Saturdays, and there was a new phone he claimed was for work, even though he'd been retired for 5 years. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but I'm also not naive. I noticed the little things. He stopped asking about my book club, which he used to tease me about. Our conversations became more distant, more polite, and that politeness was somehow more hurtful than an argument. One summer, Ava came to visit with her family. I watched Victor at the dinner table, full of energy, telling stories, but then I saw him checking his phone under the table multiple times. Ava didn't say anything, but I knew she must have noticed too. That September, I followed him. I felt guilty about it, but I needed to know. I told him I was going to my friend Carol's house for lunch, then parked a few streets away. I watched him drive off in a car I'd never seen before, wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He parked outside a trendy coffee shop and walked in like he owned the place. I stood on the sidewalk, the autumn air crisp and cold. A gust of wind blew a leaf across my path, and I thought about all the years we'd spent together, and how many secrets he might be hiding. 2 weeks later, he sat me down at the kitchen table. He folded his hands, the way he did when he was about to make a big announcement. "Hazel," he said, using my full name, "I want a divorce. I've met someone. Her name is Stella, and she's 32. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I looked at him, the man I'd shared my life with for 45 years, and I asked, "How long?" 3 years, he said. 3 years while I was teaching, taking care of the house, and believing in our marriage. Then he said the words that would haunt me, "Hazel, you're old and you're not well. What do you want me to do?" I'd been diagnosed with mild back pain a couple of years ago, but it didn't define me. I looked at him for a long time, and then I smiled. He thought I was defeated, but he didn't know that 2 years ago, when I first started to suspect something, I'd taken matters into my own hands. I had an appointment with a financial advisor, Miss Lewis, in a neighboring town. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman in her 55s. She helped me understand my rights, what I could legally move, and what I needed to document. I spent those 2 years quietly keeping records of all our joint expenses, and I transferred a portion of my inheritance from my mother into accounts solely in my name. Victor never asked about that money, and he had no idea what I'd been up to. After that fateful conversation in the kitchen, I sat at the table for hours, thinking about my life. I realized that I couldn't just sit back and let him take everything. I called a family law attorney, Mr. Thompson. He was recommended by Miss Lewis, and I knew I could trust him. I gathered all my documents, my records of Victor's financial behavior, and the statements that showed large withdrawals from our joint account. I knew he'd been spending money on Stella, but I needed proof. The proof came from our credit card statement. One Tuesday evening, while Victor was in the guest room on his new phone, I logged into our account and found charges at a jewelry store, a fancy restaurant, and a hotel. He'd told me he was on a business trip, but he was with Stella. I printed the statement and added it to my folder. I called Mr. Thompson the next day, and he said it was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. As the divorce process began, Victor hired his own attorney, Mr. Harris. He became more and more defensive, and his behavior at home changed. He started going through my things, looking for any sign of what I'd been doing. One day, Stella called me directly. She said it would be better for everyone if we settled out of court. I told her that I'd spent 45 years building this life, and I intended to get what I was owed. A few weeks later, Mr. Harris sent us a settlement offer. Victor proposed that he would take the house and give me a buyout of $200,000. He would keep his retirement fund, and the joint investment accounts would be split 60/40 in his favor. There was also a clause that required me not to make any public statements about the divorce. I told Mr. Thompson to reject it. I knew that based on our marriage and my contributions, I deserved more. During this time, I joined a support group for women going through divorce. There, I met Mrs. Jenkins, a 70-year-old retired nurse who had gone through a similar situation. She shared her experiences and gave me advice on how to deal with the emotional and legal aspects of the divorce. She also introduced me to a forensic accountant, Mr. Brown. He went through Victor's financial records and found that he had spent around $35,000 on Stella over the past 3 years. This was marital money, and it was a clear case of dissipation of assets. As the court date approached, I was nervous but determined. I knew I had a strong case, but I also knew that the legal process could be unpredictable. On the day of the hearing, I wore my best suit. I walked into the courtroom with Mr. Thompson by my side. Victor and Mr. Harris were already there. Victor looked nervous, and I could tell he was starting to realize that he might not get what he wanted. Mr. Thompson presented our case methodically. He showed the judge the evidence of Victor's extramarital affair, the financial records, and the history of my contributions to our marriage. Mr. Harris tried to argue that Victor was the primary earner and that the settlement offer was fair. But Mr. Thompson countered with the Virginia case law on equitable distribution in long-term marriages and the dissipation of assets. The judge listened carefully to both sides. After a long day of arguments, she announced that she would give her verdict in 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I waited, trying to stay positive. I spent time with Ava and my grandchildren, and I focused on my volunteer work at the local community center. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. Mr. Thompson called me with the news. The judge had ruled in my favor. The house on Elm Street was to be sold, and I would receive 65% of the proceeds, which came to approximately $450,000. The joint investment accounts would be split 55-45 in my favor, and I would be entitled to 40% of Victor's retirement fund. I was relieved, but I didn't feel triumphant. It was more of a sense of justice being served. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. After the divorce, Victor and Stella's relationship didn't last. I heard through the grapevine that Stella was disappointed with the financial situation, and Victor was struggling to adjust to his new life. I, on the other hand, found a new beginning. I bought this condo, and I've started a new chapter in my life. I volunteer at the local library, and I've reconnected with old friends. Looking back, I realize that life can take unexpected turns. But by being prepared, by standing up for myself, and by trusting the truth, I was able to overcome a difficult situation. I've learned that no one has the right to make you small in your own story, and that with preparation and determination, you can face any challenge.